right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session. We have Bill VanSickle. I'm probably pronounced that wrong, and I apologize, Bill, with the St. Johns River Water Management District, and is going to talk about update on UAV activities. Just a few announcements before we do get started. This session is being recorded, and we'll make the recordings available after the conference at some point. Also, we're going to have questions will be at the end, and you'll see in your little control panel, there'll be a question area. So if you have questions, just type them in there throughout the session when they come up. Better to type them in when they come up and not to wait to the end where you might forget it. And as time permits, we will answer as many questions as we can. We do have a hard stop. So at 1:45, we do have to end the session because we have to make room for the next presenter to be able to come in for the next virtual session. So we will have that hard stop at the 1:45. Without further ado, just also want to thank our sponsors, as you can see up on the screen. They're the ones that make it. These are platinum sponsors and other sponsors. They're the ones that make this whole virtual workshop this year, which we weren't sure we're going to be able to do or not, free for all of you. So we do appreciate all of our sponsors. As the SHRUG treasurer, I know when they said they wanted to do a virtual conference, I was happy. When they said the board said they wanted to do it free for everybody, I wasn't so happy, but thanks to these sponsors, we were able to provide this free of charge to everybody. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and change the presenter screens to Bill and let him take it away.
All righty, so it says show my screen when ready. What are you seeing, JT?
I am seeing the St. Johns River Water Management District and the map with the districts.
Wonderful, good,
and
good.
You are live.
All right. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me here. My name is Bill VanSickle. I'm a professional geographer and a remote pilot at St. Johns River Water Management District. That's that portion of the state that you see up here in the upper right-hand corner. That means my job is analyzing data over space and time, and sometimes I get to fly a drone. So just for those of you who aren't familiar with the water management districts, we're agencies of the state. We're responsible for the administration of the water resources at the regional level. Our jurisdictional boundaries are based on watersheds. We're directed by governing boards who are appointed by the governor on staggered terms, which means they can't switch them all out at once. They take some time to do that. And then we're under the general supervisory and budgetary authority of the DEP and the state legislature. So our jurisdictional area is about 23% of the state. That's 12,000 square miles. I think Rhode Island, yada, yada, I don't know. 21% of the population, 4.7 million people live in our district, mostly in places like, Orlando and US Oneville down here and Jacksonville up here, Gainesville over here, et cetera. And we own outright 775,000 acres and maintain them for recreational use and keep them from being developed. And a lot of it is wetlands. So our core missions are water supply, water quality, flood protection, and natural systems. That means that we're all about water quality, water quantity, above ground and below ground, and keeping it out of your living room, and using natural systems as part of that picture. We can actually restore wetlands and use them for water retention and to clean the water up before it gets out to the river or to the ocean. So the core focus of the UAV program this year, we started in 2017. Our core focus this year is really to serve needs as they're identified by stakeholders. In other words, I don't really need to go out looking for work. Folks are coming to me at this point, which is right about on target. And then to maximize return and the added value, especially in key mission areas, while minimizing investment. So think of that as either do more with less or do everything with nothing. We've already got the equipment, we've already got the certificated pilots. Now it's just about how do we really just turn and burn, make everybody else's job easier and minimize the time required by everybody. And of course, an added bonus focus this year was being able to work remotely and distantly from one another. So I may have covered this last year, I don't recall, but this is an example of a construction monitoring project. It's one of the areas that we can be helpful to other folks within the organization. And so, you know, you fly this area, and in this case, we use drone deploy. You can present this information kind of ortho imagery, like, you know, looking straight down, or with drone deploy, you can actually view the model and interact with it, which is just really cool, right? It's got its drawbacks though. One of the things is that because I chose not to fly through the structure, I don't actually have a very good picture of what's, you know, this, you should be able to see clear through this, and you don't in this case. Also, you'll notice that it's taking some of these hard edges here, the scaffolding, et cetera, it's kind of warping them, and, you know, you know, it actually mashed this stuff all down onto the surface, right? Because it didn't pick up that this is a 3D feature. So you don't see this walkway guard here as a walkway guard. So it's not really as faithful a representation as we want it to be. Now you can see the riprap that they put in and all that jazz. You know, they've dewatered this area. You know, they put in these I can't remember the name of them, but you know what I'm talking about. These thingies here that hold the water back, and then they've drawn out the water, and they've put in the riprap and repaired some of the, brought in some sod, et cetera. So it turns out that this year we're going to take a different approach for this kind of project. Instead, we're just going to do cardinal directions: northeast, southwest, and then semi-cardinal: northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest, and all from the same location, and the locations as the previous year, and just kind of try to give them a picture, a 4D picture, if you will, you know, continuing ongoing progress on the project. And JT may not have mentioned it, but if you type your questions into the chat, I will address them at the end. I just wanted to kind of like get through my spiel first, if you don't mind too much. So let's go back to the presentation. Another thing that we've been using this for this year, the drones for this year, is habitat management. In this case, creating a habitat suitability model in Lake Monroe restoration area. And I want to walk through, take a little bit more time with you because you're a more technical audience, and talk about what, you know, how we did that. So what you're looking at is a scrub jay habitat area. Florida scrub jay are on the threatened and endangered species list, and they really prefer to live in the 0 to 6 foot range of vegetation. In other words, they forage from 0 to 3 feet, they nest from 3 to 6 feet. Anything higher than that, above ground level, is going to be habitat for predators that will come in and swoop down on them and take their babies and all that stuff. So, so what our land manager, Pete Henn, wanted to do was he wanted to just kind of like survey this area in the biological survey sense. It's not in the engineering survey sense. He just wanted to get an idea of where where are we providing habitat for non-desirables who could prey upon the Florida scrub jay. So he went and took these shots. You can see it's not a large area, maybe, I don't know, 80 acres or something like that. It's crisscrossed by these paths, and that's going to be important in a minute. So, you know, here's the standard Mosaic product. That was really quick and easy to resolve. He did this, he flew this down near Orlando. He went to his home in, this was during the COVID, so it was like May or something. Went to his home in Titusville, and then uploaded it to our server in Palatka, and then sent me an email to my home in Gainesville. And so I presented, you know, I put together this Mosaic, no big deal, just Mosaic, but that didn't really give us enough information. What really matters is the digital surface model that comes along with that. And this was done and resolved in Pix4D in this case. And so what you're seeing is tops of trees, right? You're seeing the elevation at the top of the tree, but this is a sandhill community. So it kind of goes up and down, the ground goes up and down. And so just top of tree is not enough information. You've got to get bottom of tree and subtract the two in order to actually get the height of the tree. So how do we do that? Well, one way to do it is you send a survey crew out and they get a bunch of points that you can see in your imagery, and ideally they would grab these intersections of trails and they put a target that's visible, and then they get survey points on it. I'd go ahead and bring that in and nail this down to the earth that way. But we didn't do that, partly because our survey crew is very busy doing other stuff and probably don't want to be bothered with this stuff too much. So instead, I brought in the ground surface model from LiDAR into ArcGIS, and then from that, I overlaid the imagery, and we identified these points that are basically clear to ground points where you can see the ground clearly in this image. And if you can see that ground clearly, on the assumption that they haven't changed, that nobody's changed the elevation of this trail, in other words, they haven't groomed it really heavily with some grooming equipment, and I think that's a pretty safe assumption in our case, then I should be able to infer vertical locations at every one of these points, and then I should be able to nail our model down to that, and then I should have the ability to subtract the tops of trees from the bottoms of trees, represented by the bare earth surface in this LiDAR picture behind it. And so digital ground surface model minus the ground surface model equals habitat suitability model. And in ArcGIS, I just went ahead and classified these as 0 to 3. That's your light green foraging areas. 3 to 6, that's your darker green or brighter green nesting areas. And then these really important areas up here in red, because they're important, are the tall spots where raptors could kind of come swooping down on the babies. So I was able to provide this information to him, I think the following day. So within a business day cycle, and he was able to go out there with some chainsaws and just take down the tall stuff and get right back to his regular duties as assigned. This is also kind of a neat project. This is a zoomed in area. I want to show you the whole picture. So I was approached by some folks at DEP who were wanting to get a picture of this reservoir during a drawdown event. Its drawdown was about 12 feet. So in Florida, that's quite a bit. And he wanted to see the littoral zone. So that really from this tree line edge out to the water's edge would indicate that pretty well. And I was able to fly this area. It's, I think, around 4 miles from here to here, and serve it up on ArcGIS Online on their image reviewer. And in that, you can see there's our airboat that we operated from, and the landing zone mat is right here. And I would normally sit in the front row, but during operations, I come back to the previous row, so I maintain a good social distance from those whirling props. Operators back here, I think we have one observer here, so we're all staying out of the way of the props. And so we took off and landed and ran this sortie from here back to the dam, and then from here up to our next station, which was right here, and then to our next station, which was not seeing myself on this one, but oh, there it is right there. So, and I could go about, I think about half a mile in either direction and maintain a clear visual line of sight during that time. And then this one is, I'm right down here. There I am, there we are. And this one's kind of a neat one for any fluvial morphology fans out there. So this area is draining a wetland down into the reservoir, and you can see that they channelized this area. And at the points where they stopped channelizing or where the sides of the channel blew out, what you're seeing is these fluvial or these deposition fans where it just, busting out and dropping material. And then same thing here, it's changing speed, it's dropping sand if it changes a lot of speed. If it if it changes a little speed, then it may move or stop moving sediment material on top of that sand, and it makes a really interesting visual effect. So then I would, like I said, able to mosaic that all into individual parts in, I think, Pix4D. Yeah, I think I did that in Pix4D, and then I mosaicked those together in ArcGIS and served them up via the ArcGIS Online. So next thing, we've still got some time, so so I'm going to go ahead and bump ahead to some of our kind of future project stuff. One of the things that we've noticed is that we'd really like to use the drones to discern between desirable species in our wetland restoration areas and non-desirable species, exotics, invasives, invasive exotics, et cetera. The problem is that how do you do that, right? You've gathered this really high quality imagery, and then you're trying to figure out, what's a Cuban bulrush and what's a regular bulrush and what's Typha and what's something else. So the answer to that question is spectral curves. It has to do with if you're looking at multiple wavelengths of imagery, what kind of response do you get? Now, we are very early on this. This is why I kind of added it in the after slide thing, because this is the kind of thing, if any of you are working on projects like this where you're usually using satellite imagery to discern communities or species, and supplementing that with drone imagery, that's what's in my heart to do. I just had a chat this morning with a professor from U of F who's working on an AI version of that. So we'll see if we make some progress on that, if we can do it, maybe get some energetic master student to do a paper on it. Maybe we'll make some progress, but we'll see. And of course, part of that is making a library of all the different spectral responses from each of the plants. And so we're going to have to create something like this. And then for those of you who are in the process of building up a drone program at some point, I went ahead and included considerations from another talk that I gave to another group of people. So the question, in-house versus contracted out, fixed wing versus rotor or vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, desktop versus cloud for the processing, visible versus multi or hyperspectral imagery, which ones suit your program? And that's all going to depend on your needs, right? So a big part of this is talking to your stakeholders and saying, okay, what kind of stuff do you need from me in order to do your job, and what sort of value would that return to you? And that can be really useful, especially if they're already contracting stuff out and they have a dollar amount that you can show how much money you could save the state, because saving the state money is what we're all about. And so contracting out versus in-house, if you contract it out, you do reduce liability, but you also reduce control. And ultimately, if it's your property, you're still liable. So beware. You're going to lower overhead because you're not paying for training, planning, processing, and other compliance issues. And you're going to reduce the effort because you won't have to figure out how to fly the drone, figure out how to manage the imagery when it comes back, et cetera. And it scales up and down pretty quickly. In-house, the advantages there are, well, the disadvantages, it's a lot more hassle and effort. So if you're not getting an additional FTE, you got to find somebody who can rededicate current FTE. That's kind of what I've done from my primarily GIS and LiDAR work, moved over to still doing a lot of GIS work, doing less LiDAR work and doing more drone stuff. You have more control, you have more agility, you can get out there, on a day's notice. You've got lower ongoing costs because what happens is once the software is paid for and once the hardware is paid for and once you have your training and you have staff, then it's just, and that's where we're at right now, is we're trying to take advantage of our costs being down to almost nothing over what we normally pay to do our jobs. And, how do we maximize return on investment at that point? And then the logistics are easier because you don't have to like coordinate between the contractor who's doing some work and the contractor who's flying and to observe the work and so on and so forth. And it is fun, but we're not really, I probably shouldn't have mentioned that, but it is fun. So fixed wing or rotor. Rotor, typically four prop stuff. It's easier to fly. It's cheaper. Wind doesn't interfere with it. So for instance, I don't have to deal with the issue of, taking off into the wind, because our levees don't always point into the wind. Sometimes they point sideways to the wind. And so now you've got the wind trying to knock you off the levee while you're taking off and landing. So, so it's easier to land. You just bring it down. There's actually a button for it. I don't use the button. I always manually land because it kind of keeps me in touch with manual override mode, which sometimes you have to do, especially on smaller things like landing on the top of on an airboat or on the top of a Marshmaster, or occasionally on the box that I brought it in because the grass is too high. And then missions are shorter, so you're talking about about 20 minutes per mission, which is or per sortie, which is 120 acres. So you look at that project I did with that reservoir, that was probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen sorties in order to get all that imagery, and then they had to be put together in post process. So fixed wing, on the other hand, you get much greater area and longer flight time, but if you can't see that thing beyond half a mile, which is a half mile by half mile box, is about 120 acres, then I don't know if you got any huge advantages. Maybe if it's larger and you can keep an eye on it. I don't know. I haven't experimented with that, and they're, like I said, quite a bit more expensive. $20,000 versus $2,000. And I can't land it on a levee or a vehicle. You can pop a chute and gig it out if out of the water, if it's waterproof. It's my understanding it's harder to fly. So, I'm all about easy, especially when you're first learning. And just gonna throw a wake up slide in here, guys. Don't hand catch the drone, please. These are not pictures of district staff. No district staff were harmed in the making of this slide. This is just off of the internet. But if you're not talented enough to just land the thing on the deck, then hand the controls over to somebody who can. Don't try to hand catch it, especially without PPE. Gloves, face gear, arm, protection, etc. So back to the nerd stuff here. So when you're processing, do you process it on the desktop or in the cloud? Well, they're both great options. If you purchase software, so I apologize, I've got my two things reversed. So the left side is the cloud stuff, where you're purchasing software as a service, which means you have ongoing annual costs. You're limited by what their algorithm is. So if their algorithm allows you to do certain things, or if that was one of our problems with Drone Deploy, is that we weren't allowed to use ground control points because we didn't purchase that level of software, and our management was putting pressure on us to even lower the amount of ongoing costs. So though it was easier to use, and I definitely recommend it for its ease of use, if you don't want to be on the hook for $1,000 every year, then you just, got to bite the bullet and buy some software. So that gets us over to the right side. Pay once and done, although typically they'll offer upgrades at some point, and it'll cost more money. But if your projects support those upgrades, then you can support the cost of it. And you got to pay for training, got to pay for computer hardware, storage space. So if you're lucky like I am and you work in IT already, then it's not so bad, because you can just find the space you need, find the equipment that you need, or hopefully you've got some good support in your IT, and they'll find it for you. Finally, getting down to RGB versus multispectral. RGB, red, green, blue, that's all the visible stuff. It's easy to view. It makes sense to your brain, right? Even though the shades of red stuff makes sense to your brain also knows that, you know, plants aren't supposed to be red. That's just another way of looking at the imagery. It gives you much more information. I'll get back to that in a second. So most of our workload is acceptable as RGB. But that limits our ability to discern things like plant health and discern one species or community from another. We've purchased a fairly inexpensive red edge and near infrared sensor, and it's, you know, it's more data, so it's more complicated. There's more processing time. You have more different variables to tweak. Like I said, we don't have a signature library to match things against, but you know, it does give you that broader range of discernment. So we'll probably just kind of continue to develop that with time. But so far, it's been a struggle. I'll grant that. So basic equipment, you know, $1,500 to actually a little bit less than that for the Mavic Pro, but the Mavic Pro drivers aren't available for companies like Pix4D, so they can't actually do anything with the data yet. So the Phantom 4 is a very solid choice, and the Inspire 1, the one just below that, allows you the ability to use interchangeable sensors. And now once you add things like RTK or PPK, in other words, locational awareness that gets you down from the meters to the centimeters, that's going to crank up the cost. And now you're talking about, you know, 10 grand-ish with all the equipment and whatnot. And of course, having things like thermal sensors, those are kind of cool. This is what our 5-band sensor looks like. It's a Centera double 4K. It was designed for ag use, but the price was pretty good, and we had a project that needed it. So here I've kind of gone over the software products. Drone Deploy was $800 a year. Pix4D Mapper is $1,000, but it requires a whole lot of. It's not easy. I mean, if you can take all the defaults and it works, that's great. But then you immediately step off the deep end and you're flailing around and trying to figure out how to make stuff work. And the folks who produced it, they're getting more English as a first language people presenting their material, but it's a little distracting. They're from Switzerland, so it's just anyway, it's just a little weird. But their Pix4D React product is really good, and it's really easy. And I've actually trained engineers to use it, which you know, they're educated, but they're trainable. So it was really nice to be able to have something that folks could use on their laptop without being connected while you're still in the field to resolve things really quickly, you know, a couple hundred acres in less than an hour. And I recommend that too. It was really designed for what do you call that? Event response, you know, emergency stuff, but it works really good for regular stuff too. And that's it. That's all. I'm out of time. It's 1:30. I'm ready to take some questions. Back to you, JT.
All right, thank you. It's a great presentation. I think all of us are really getting more and more and using drones and such as far as within our daily ops, or at least being exposed to it. So let me just go ahead and do a quick little screen share there. We do have a few questions that came in. One of them was related pretty much to the last little bit you were talking about. If you have anything more to expand on that, but have you evaluated different software solutions to process image? And if so, any preferences over them?
That might have come in kind of early in the process, right? Because I did talk about that. I did not talk about the ESRI products. And I have reviewed those and talked to the folks over at ESRI about it at a recent meeting. And it looks like they're still kind of catching up to Drone Deploy and Pix4D as far as I can tell. They, you know, claim to integrate all these different things more effectively, but since we have what we need to do what we need to do, and we don't have the additional budget money to add additional licenses, we're going to stick with what we have for now.
Okay, and that's like we have our drone program here in Thomasville, and we use Pix4D, but we've looked at some of the other ones. Is there any benefit you see as far as having multiple softwares, like where something might do one thing a lot better than another one?
I am really thankful that we used Pix4D and Drone Deploy in our first couple of years of operation, because Pix4D, I mean, like I said, Pix4D is really cool. You can do a lot with it, but it's kind of like crossing the street with an airliner. You know, there's a lot of buttons, a lot of levers, and until you get really good at what all those buttons and levers do, you know, it's tough. Whereas Drone Deploy, I was able to go out and fly a project area, and at lunchtime I stopped by a public library. Don't even have to go inside with my lunch to get on their internet, upload all my imagery, and by the time I got back to district headquarters in Palatka, there was an email in my inbox saying, "Here's your map." And that's really cool, you know, to not have to wait another day for the thing to process overnight. But like I said, Pix4D React sort of obviates that. I mean, I can basically crank it up on the laptop, plug the laptop into the inverter on the Jeep, and you know, it's working, doing the processing on the way home. Or I can, you know, just plug in at the nearby Greasy Spoon restaurant and again having lunch, because you know the storms roll in around 2 in the afternoon in the summertime, so shouldn't really be out there on the marsh flying at that point anyway. So take a late lunch, do the processing, and it's done by the time you get back to the office.
And that's a good point, like you said earlier about, you know how you need to use the imagery and need to use your drone program, and
Yeah,
then find the tools that'll work for that. We
right.
do have another question here. It says, do you fly under a COA from the FAA or a Part 107 rules?
All of our pilots are Part 107 certificated. The way we got there was at the very beginning of the program, we identified all the work groups within our organization. We got about 500 people, or had that many then anyway, in the district-wide, you know, working for us. So basically, we've identified the work groups that were most likely to need the product, and I, you know, reached out to their management and asked them for a candidate who was going to be in the field, who would, you know, benefit from the imagery. And we had about a dozen people sit down and go through a 2-day or 3, I think it might have been a 3-day ground school offered by a local instructor who'd been doing Part 61, which is small aircraft instruction, and he was also 107 certificated, and he had also taught some 107 courses. So we had everybody sit through that, and then they all took their. We had a little work group where we would. After that training, we had a work group that we would get together and talk about airspace and figuring out how to use the charts and weather and all that other, and you know, landing patterns at the airports and so on. And then so that was like November, and then December and January of 2017, 2018, we got everybody their certificate, or everybody got their certifications. And then any new pilots that have come on since then, because we've had some attrition, we just use either Dart drones or Drone Ground School. You know, one of the online products, about $200, and if you pass their pre-tests and but you fail the ground school, if you fail the test, the FAA test, then they'll pay for it. They'll pay for you to take it again. So that's been working really well. And the other part is you know, developing our own safety program and protocol, and making sure that new pilots kind of hang out with more seasoned pilots in their first couple of flights, so that we've got overlap between the ones who've been there and the ones who are coming on board.
That's good. Just gotta make sure you have those right certifications before you go up in the air.
Absolutely.
Looks like one final question. What type of equipment are you using that allows you to change from imagery to a sensor, or are you using different aircraft?
So the Inspire 1 allows us to switch out from the RGB to the thermal to the near infrared and red edge. And so we're still not doing LiDAR, and I actually had an engineer ask me about that No, actually, it was somebody in a local government was asking me about it, and I just said, dude, I don't really know if you want to deal with LiDAR. I mean, the equipment gets so much more expensive, and the data gets so much more difficult to deal with that you know, it's just not as simple as you hit the LiDAR button and you get LiDAR. It's much more complicated than that. So but to answer that original question, so yes, if you buy something like the Inspire 1, then you can switch out the sensor from RGB to near infrared to thermal. That's the, you know, just like sensing hot or cold. And whereas the Phantom 4 is just, you know, whatever you see is whatever you get, but it works great. It's a wonderful piece of equipment. I wouldn't disparage it at all.
Okay. And we did have another question come in. It says, an amateur question, what flight patterns do you recommend for 2D aerials over flat sea level terrain? Flight elevation suggestions, flight speed, do you recommend a snake pattern? With or
Okay.
without curved flights, using a Mavic 1 Pro Platinum?
We're getting specific now. All right.
Getting very specific.
You know, I've experimented with a couple of different approaches, but what seems to work is kind of like I would call a mowing pattern. I mean, you know, it's more like a plowing pattern, but not everybody's, you know, comes from farmland. So basically you go down to the head row, you hang a left, you come back up, you hang a right, you go down, you hang a left, and you know, so it's kind of a square serpentine pattern. But you can also fly that going in both directions. The warning about that is, especially for larger areas, if you come back over the same ground later and light conditions are different, then it might get a little weird the way it processes. I've found that as long as you've got sufficient overlap, around 70% from one photo that's fore and aft and left and right, then Drone Deploy and Pix4D React and all those products are able to make a nice mosaic from that. And if you're working 2D, I would definitely recommend Pix4D React, because then you don't have to open it up in a GIS product in order to do things with it. You can make maps. You know, it has like a standard format with a little north arrow and a scale bar and all that jazz. So you can basically give a product to somebody, you know, that you can mark it up. You can put pins down, or this is where my truck was, that's where the accident happened, whatever. You know, you can mensurate areas and say this was about 2 acres and so on. So I would definitely, especially for a nice flat terrain like that, Pix4D React is a really good choice. It's a lot easier to learn, especially if you're just kind of playing around. As others might have recommended in the past, you know, you can play with a downloadable trial version until you decide you want to pull the trigger and pay the bucks.
Okay. We have another person who's asked, you kind of answered this, but not specifically. They said you mentioned that you used Pix4D to run analysis, but have you used Arcgis Metashape as well? And if you have any thoughts on that software?
I have not.
And I will just throw in my little bit of knowledge here, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
I did evaluate Pix4D and Arcgis Metashape. And I found them both to be very comparable. We, in the end, went with Pix4D more because of the ease of use. I think you can get, if you're really into heavy analysis and imagery analysis, Arcgis probably is the better product. But for our, and kind of like you had said, Bill, you know, you have to know what your program needs, and our program didn't need that high level detailed of analysis with it. I'm just going to scan the questions real quick one more, just to make sure I didn't miss any. It doesn't look like it, but it's, everything is like in super small text, so I want to make sure. Yep, there is a follow-up question. You mentioned 70% overlap during flight pattern settings. The flight patterns are tight then. I don't know if that's a question or a statement. It's got the question mark, but really,
to answer the rest of that question, we normally fly, if we're really just trying to get acreage, we fly at 395 feet, because of course your upper limit is 400 feet, and if you can show, you know, from your flight log that you were respecting that plus 5 feet, that you're showing that you're taking the extra, you're going that extra mile, right? It's not a big deal because your next level of flight up is like at 1,000 feet, but it's showing that even in the event that, you know, maybe you've got some bad control data for elevation, you're still going to stay in your lane, and anything you can show FAA in the unfortunate event of an unfortunate event is a really good thing to, you know, to show that you've got SOPs, to show that you've got a flight plan, to show that you put in, you know, a LANC request if that was appropriate, and, you know, so on and so forth. Anything you can do to show that you were paying attention to what you were doing and how you were doing it makes a difference, as a friend once said, between a bad day and a terrible day.
All right. Well, I thank you very much for all the great information. I know I'll probably be reaching out to you and asking some questions to kind of compare our program to get ideas from you. And I'm sure that everybody else attending also had a good input there from that. This would end this session. We are at our hard stop that we have to.
Since we got 3 more minutes, I just want to say one more thing. If anybody is interested in creating a user community, you know, Matt Adams over at Flagler County has done a pretty good job of starting that. So I'd point you in his direction if you like. But, you know, I think this is clearly going to be an ongoing industry trend, right? And so we should have I mean, I'm not saying we have to separate from SHRUG. I'm just saying within SHRUG, you know, if there was a regular kind of a path that people who are using this technology can take advantage of to share information and to, you know, not just one way from me to you guys, but back from you to me. I'd really like to see more of that happen.
I think that's a great idea. I'd like to see that as well. So we'll have to see if we can make it happen in next year's presentation. It's already started.
Wonderful.
How we all got together.
Cool.
Well, I want to thank you again, Bill, for your information and sharing your activities with us. And also want to thank everybody for attending, and also thanking our sponsors again. Remember, they are the ones that are making this all free for you. We'll be ending this session now, and remember to check your schedule for the next session that you signed up for, and they'll be starting in about 15 minutes. And take care and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.